That says lit, right? lit.
At the annual convention of a national coalition pushing for reparations, the message was loud and clear.
Anything we've ever got from America has been as a consequence of struggle, and it will be struggle to get reparations. We have to build a movement that will create the kind of crisis for America that it has no alternative but to give our people what is our right. Uhuru!
That was Omali Yeshitela, one of the more radical speakers.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We have a jam-packed special program for you all today, so we ask you to anticipate spending an additional 30 minutes with your favorite show team. Today's study is discussing the historic first World Tribunal on Reparations to African People, initiated by the African People's Socialist Party 40 years ago. This tribunal was a part of a campaign led by the chairman to make reparations a household word. And as we see reparations hotly debated today, we bear witness to the success of the chairman's strategy. What you can expect for today: an audio documentary of the 1982 tribunal and a live discussion with some of the participants of the tribunal, including Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the African Socialist International Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, who was actually not a participant of the tribunal, but found the party through the work of the tribunal, the National Director of Organization, Chimurenga Selembao, tribunal organizer and longtime Uhuru Movement supporter, Oronde Shakur, and Penny Hess, chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee. Before we begin, I just want to take this moment to encourage all of you all to like and share this video and tag someone to participate in today's lesson. Let's broaden the reach of this discussion. Comment shared in the chat section for us when you've shared it. Let's go now to the audio documentary on the first World Tribunal for reparations to African people.
On November 13th and 14th of 1982, the African National Reparations Organization, a mass organization of the African People's Socialist Party, organized and conducted a World Tribunal on reparations for Black people. Addressing the question debated across the U.S. today, are African people owed reparations? Listen to the testimonies from this tribunal and you decide.
Today, we are initiating a two-day trial of the United States government for crimes it has committed against the Black or African population of the United States. Today we are initiating a two-day process which is remarkable and historic in its implication for the use of international law as a means of addressing the crimes against oppressed people who do not have the benefit of state power and the use of national and international courts, which are traditionally only available to those groups who do possess state power. To withhold the right to justice and international legality to the powerless, oppressed African people in the United States would be to validate the most cynical concept that might makes right. It would give credence and validity to the awful concept of the right of the powerful to make and enforce international law. Such law as that is no law at all. It is accepted tyranny. Therefore, this World Tribunal must determine whether international morality might prevail in the interest of the powerless. This tribunal will determine whether, even in the absence of state power, the rights of the oppressed will be recognized as rights which may be respected in the form of applied international law.
On November 13th and 14th of 1982, Black people from around the United States and the world came together at an international tribunal in New York to hear evidence, historical, statistical, and personal, on the right of Black people in the U.S. to receive reparations from the U.S. government. Before an international panel of judges and observers representing popular movements in the Congo, Senegal, Barbados, the United States, and Tanzania, 14 hours of documentation and testimony was presented to support the charge that African people experienced genocide. This was not a mock trial. International law was laid out and legal procedures followed. This international law consisted of charters and treaties passed by the United Nations after World War II to hold governments accountable to the world community. The judges heard the charges, followed the evidence, cross-examined witnesses, and rendered a verdict. Testimony was put forth under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which has been ratified by a majority in the United Nations, but which the United States Senate has refused to ratify for fear of being charged before world courts concerning the cases of Native American and African people in the U.S.
The Genocide Convention declares as punishable crimes any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
The first testimony came from Dr. Leonard Jeffries, chairman of the Black Studies Department of the City College of New York, who detailed the birth of civilization in Africa and the subsequent impact of the raiding slave merchants.
For 40 or 50 years, the Portuguese had been touching the coast of Africa, and they knew the riches of the culture and civilizations that had been developed there. The civilizations of Ife and Benin that produced the art, which is as classical as any art ever produced. The civilization that produced the city-states of Nigeria and the city-states of other parts of Africa. These Portuguese, being land poor, resource poor, and people poor, had to have their mind blown when they got to the Gold Coast. So the Portuguese in 1482 came back to Africa and established a permanent base, which became the beginning of the process of genocide. that saw 100 million Africans destroyed. That permanent base was called Elmina of St. George. And after that period, hundreds of slave forts were built along the African coast. In Ghana alone, along a 200-mile stretch, there are the remnants today of 50 slave forts and castles, some of them only a few miles from each other, as the European blood-sucked the African continent. In that 50-year turning point of history, when Europe moved from the periphery of world history, from its dark ages, onto center stage, and moved out African and Southern Asian and Indian peoples, the roots of that which we have to deal with today in terms of the condition of our people are there. They come out of the slave trade system, which, as Walter Rodney says, went to the development of Europe and the underdevelopment of Africans. In this 50-year period of history, you have the basis of genocide, the basis of religious intolerance, the basis of fascism. But I don't want to leave us historically with a negative note. The last period of history is 1900 to the present. 1900 to the present is the period of the African Renaissance. 1900 to the present is the period of the African Revolution. And Garvey and others understood this. The revolutions in Mozambique, Angola, and Guinea-Bissau, the revolutions taking place around Tanzania and Namibia, the movements in the Caribbean around Grenada, etc., the Cuban Revolution, the struggles of peoples on the streets of Harlem and Bedford-Stuy. These are all part of the renaissance and rebirth of African peoples. And although a genocidal process existed in history, we are reversing that genocidal process by moving into an African revolutionary consciousness.
In addition, a historical brief was submitted with documentation of extensive economic research on the amount of wealth stolen from the labor of African people held as slaves in the U.S. Wealth which was the basis of the U.S. economy for its first 100 years and which gave birth to the capitalist economic system. Estimates of wealth stolen from African people's labor through the special structures of tenant farming, wage discrimination, and the dual labor market were also made for the years following the abolition of formal chattel slavery. A minimum estimate of the wealth stolen from black people for labor alone, leaving out charges for damages incurred through murder, maiming, and rape, amounted to $4.1 trillion. Joe Mashariki, chairman of the Black Veterans for Social Justice, brought out detailed information on the use of black troops to enforce U.S. power around the world, at the same time that black people are suffering under the rule of that state power in the U.S.
The United States government is guilty of mass genocide and degradation against Africans here in America. The economic wealth and development of this country was built on the backs of black slave labor. All persons who enjoy the fruits of the so-called democracy today enjoy it at the expense of black blood, sweat, tears, and lives. As an organization of veterans from World War II to Vietnam War who fought in these wars, our motto is blacks fight no one else's war no more. We have adopted this motto because of our experience in this country. However, this motto doesn't exclude us from fighting our own war. I want to be clear on that. Such as in Tanzania, Namibia, Mississippi, or New York. People who know the anti-war movement know that the type of internal chaos that took place in the military, which helped to stop the war, and that came from people right here in our communities. The whole white anti-war movement couldn't get off the ground until blacks refused. More blacks refused to go into the military during the Vietnam War than whites, 8-2.
Evidence was also brought forth under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which states in part,
State parties undertake to prohibit and to eliminate racial discrimination in all its forms and to guarantee the right of everyone without distinction as to race, color, or national or ethnic origin to equality before the law, notable the enjoyment of the following rights: the right to equal treatment before the tribunals and all other organs administering justice, the right to security of person and protection by the state against violence or bodily harm, whether inflicted by government officials or by an individual group or institution.
Testifying on conditions for black people in southern prisons was Richard Mafundi Lake.
They wouldn't allow me any reading material for 12 years. They took and put me in a cell, 5-by-8 cell, without benefit of any writing material, reading material, radio, TV, non-cellmate for 12 years. Only thing was in that strip cell was a face basin where you only cold water, running cold water. There was no bed. It was a concrete slab block. And the only time I came out of that cell was to go to a shower for 5 minutes. And if you wasn't through showering in 5 minutes, the water was cut off on you. You didn't have any control of the water. That was for 12 years. And the only way I maintained my sanity was to play mental games with myself. I learned how to play chess without a board. I wouldn't allow them to destroy me. I was placed, I think it was 21 days that I was forced to go without bread or water. I was in a cell, stripped, winter time, sub-zero degree weather, and there was no heating, no ventilation. And I was forced to lie on that concrete block. And then the guards would come by for additional punishment and throw water on the floor. It would get so cold that the only way I could sleep, I would just run in my cell until I was just completely exhausted. And I would just fall out from exhaustion and sleep. You see the little blocks in the toilet tissue? They used to give us 3 blocks, actually count the blocks of toilet tissue. And I used to take the 3 blocks of toilet tissue and lie on that cold floor and put it on my chest and psych myself that I was covering myself with a blanket. You know, under severe conditions, a person play all kind of mental games with himself in order to survive.
Further evidence on the government's violation of this international convention was put forth by Akil al-Jundi, who was a participant in the Attica Rebellion in New York.
On September the 9th, 1971, at Attica State Prison, there had been a unanimous decision by over 1,200 prisoners at Attica. And that position was that because of all the racism that had existed at Attica and the prison system within New York State and an entire country, that it was a need for something to happen. On September the 9th, 1971, we took to the yard, 1,281 strong. On September the 13th, 1971, 43 people lost their lives as an outcome of the rebellion. Now, we know that rebellions go on and at different times, and what they do is they escalate our particular level of struggle. In this particular case, raised the question of prisons, prisoners, and the relationship of prisons to black folk, particularly in the wilderness of North America. There is a suit right now that is pending, and this civil suit is demanding $2.8 billion from the Rockefeller estate, because we remember that the governor at the time of the rebellion was none other than Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. And we want to give to the international body our suit so that the world will not forget what happened at Attica.
And Penny Shakur, a member of the Grand Jury Project and former defendant in the New York Panther 21 trial in 1969, brought forth extensive evidence concerning Cointelpro attacks against the black liberation struggle.
My nephew was beginning first grade in 1968, and that was the year of the infamous UFT teacher strike in this city. And here, thousands of children were left without schools, and so people across this city got together and set up alternative programs. The Black Panther Party was very much involved in that struggle, and I joined that struggle in 1968. By April of 1969, I was in jail, charged with some 350 felonies, including conspiracy to do just about everything there is to conspire to do. We were all acquitted. The state of New York wasted $1.5 million in trying to send us all to jail, but their conspiracy did not end there, and some of them are now political prisoners. It's important for us, however, to begin by understanding what a counterintelligence program really is. A counterintelligence program is a military operation. One goal of any counterintelligence program is to neutralize a hostile agent. The United States government considers all elements of the Black liberation movement hostile agents. When the counterintelligence program was aimed at the Black liberation movement, there was only one heading in which all black people fell, and that heading is called Black Hate Extremist Groups. And under that heading fell the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, SCLC, SNCC, CORE, the Black Panther Party, of course, Malcolm X, and anybody that fell any place within those parameters. And that, I believe, covers the general trend existing in any black family and in any black community.
Look all around us, people are starving and dying. Time for living, if you're willing, it's freedom time. Yeah.
The United Nations has also adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which declares in part that
everyone has the right to a nationality. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms.
Professor Del Hunter was demoted from position as Dean of Medgar Evers College in New York for supporting the struggle of African students for control of the institution in the interest of the black community.
The way that the black intellectual became utilized was literally not to transmit knowledge, not to discover new information, not to engage in human understanding, but literally to reproduce in a very mechanical and a very formal way that information that had been received from the ruling forces. The responsibility, therefore, of anyone who strikes of talking about freedom, liberation, and a revolution is that of creating an antithesis of the present understanding of reality. The idea, therefore, is for the core of people who have been housed outside of the institutions of higher learning, who, by the way, have usually made more of a major contribution toward the development of black people than those who've been housed inside, okay? The idea is to establish a link and a mechanism so that these individuals have a forum in order to exist and to carry on the information sharing and the understanding that they have.
This Universal Declaration of Human Rights also holds that
everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control.
One of the many individual black people who came forward to give testimony on her conditions of life and right to reparations was Sharon Smith.
One of the unique things about Central Brooklyn is that it's the largest black population in the country, but the majority of that population is made up of women and children. One of the most pressing problems for us as mothers in this city is decent housing. We have a responsibility of providing a decent home for our children. However, it is kind of hard to do that when you're being exploited and oppressed by a criminal landlord, further perpetuated by a court system. I've lived in apartments where, well, the ceilings are always falling in. That's common. Rodents, rats, roaches is a common problem. The cold is a common problem in a lot of buildings that I've lived in this city. When the temperature was below zero last year, we froze. You have on twice as many clothes inside, and you take off clothes to go outside. I was getting a lot of phone calls and letters home from the teachers as such, and he can't be still, my son can't be still, my son is not being productive. And I did not know how to get across to these teachers that if my son go to bed cold and then he wake up cold and he can't wash up efficiently in the bathroom that the ceiling is falling in, how in the world is he going to be productive in a classroom in a public school of miseducation, which is another story in itself. We go to housing court, and on any day of the week, there are loads of people, African people, to be dealing in that system at one time. Something is definitely wrong. I consider that genocide. They're trying to kill our spirits. What it has done is just rise my anger. I want to see justice. I want to see reparations for us.
Testimony was brought out concerning the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which includes the following provisions.
The state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. The steps to be taken to achieve the full realization of this right shall include those necessary for the provision of the reduction of the stillbirth rate and of infant mortality and for the healthy development of the child, the creation of conditions which would assure to all medical service and medical attention in the event of sickness.
Black healthcare activist Ibun Adelona testified to the systematic violation of this provision by the United States and state authorities in regards to black people in the U.S.
In regards to our struggle for self-determination, we have had to define for ourselves what that means. For us, that means having control over the institutions that affect our lives. It means the ability to define our needs and to have access to resources to develop the social forms that would meet those needs. Generally, throughout the world, infant mortality rates are recognized as one of the most reliable measures of the general health status of a community. Among African people in New York, our rate of infant death is 36.8% greater than that of white New Yorkers. If you compare Manhattan and Brooklyn to Mississippi, you see an even larger discrepancy in the sense that 2 to 3 times those numbers begin to appear in other parts of the country. We found that there was a pattern of hospitals being closed in black communities. Now, when you have an understanding of the relationship of business and government in regards to whether or not a hospital stays open, then you understand that when a hospital closes, it is because the government wants that hospital to close. What they do is pull back on the kind of reimbursement that they give to that hospital, so in effect they create a bankruptcy. A total of $10.7 billion was spent in New York City in 1980 for healthcare expenditures, and $5.7 billion of this was spent on hospital care. Over 50% of that money for New York City, and I'm talking about all 5 boroughs, went to that string of hospitals in the area that we call Bedpan Alley, which is a predominantly white middle class and upper class community. And we're talking about tax dollars. We're talking about the money that comes from all of us. We're talking about our money is going disproportionately to one sector in regards to the health industry.
Following the testimony, the judges retired and determined a unanimous verdict. Speaking on the impact of the tribunal was Justice Ladipu Solanke, chairman of the National United Movement of Barbados.
A people who have faced the horrors as outlined in the testimony of these 2 days must congratulate themselves to have the moral fortitude to be here for this historical tribunal. Irrefutable evidence has been brought before this tribunal to indict the U.S. government without a shadow of a doubt. African people in the U.S. are indeed due reparations from the United States government. The crime against African people in the U.S. is without fear of contradiction the greatest crime in the known history of human civilization.
The verdict of the judges was that
1. African people in the U.S. are due reparations from the U.S. government at the amount of $4.1 trillion, with damages to be determined at later tribunals. 2. Imprisoned black revolutionaries should be granted political prisoner and prisoner of war status based on the Geneva Convention and other United Nations determinations. 3. U.S. treatment of Africans in the U.S. represents a serious enough breach of the United Nations Human Rights Charter to justify eviction of the U.S. from the United Nations. And 4. The testimony and documentation presented at the tribunal justifies the establishment of a permanent body to monitor U.S. treatment of African people in the U.S.
Calling for the black communities around the United States to take out the verdict of the tribunal and organize chapters of the African National Reparations Organization, Omali Yeshitela, People's Advocate and Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, summed up the Reparations Tribunal.
We've heard testimony, and there has been introduced documentation which shows that it is the oppression of African people here and throughout the world which is the very foundation, the cornerstone of the existence of this terrible world economic system that causes destruction throughout this earth. Such being the case, it's very clear that if you remove the cornerstone, the building will come tumbling down. Our oppression represents the cornerstone and at the same time the weakest link in this imperialist country, this imperialist world. And therefore, the judgment which comes from a tribunal such as this is very, very important. If you live in a country or a world that is built on slavery, barbarity, thievery, genocide, the institutions of that society in any place of the world will be there for the purpose of sustaining the enslavement and the genocide. We have set about creating another institution, and this institution is a World Tribunal, which brought the United States government for the first time in its history to trial for the crimes that it has committed against black people in this country. And this tribunal is biased tribunal. It is a tribunal that moves off the assumption that black people must be free. It moves clearly off the assumption that black people must be free, and that anything that stands in the way of that liberation must be removed.
America was built, understand, by stolen labor on stolen land. Take a second thought as you clap and stand. Can you rock the house from inside the camp as you move into the beat to the early light? The country's moving to the right. Prepare now, all get high and wait, cause it ain't no party in the holy state.
This program was produced by Burning Spear Media, narrated by Dorothy Lewis and Laura Dotson. Senior producer was Gaeta Cambone. Audio engineer was Sandy Thompson. For more information and programs, visit theburningspear.com.
How we gonna make the black nation rise? Gotta agitate, educate, and organize. How we gonna make the black nation rise?
Uhuru, wow, so profound, that documentary. That was the first World Tribunal for Reparations to African People conducted by the African People's Socialist Party over 40 years ago. And it's important to say that following that tribunal, the party held 12 consecutive world tribunals to enforce the demand for reparations to African people. So I want to just really salute the leadership of our party, of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, all of the leaders and organizers who organized that profound event historical occasion. And I just want to say that if you're just joining us, you are tuned in to a special Omali Taught Me episode where we discuss the demand for reparations popularized by our party starting more than 40 years ago. So as mentioned, we just listened to a powerful audio documentary of the First World Tribunal on reparations. And now we're going to hear from some of the participants as well as those impacted by this tribunal. So to kick off this panel discussion, I'd like to welcome the leader of the African nation and the person who served as the people's advocate at the First World Tribunal, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, comrade. I'd like to thank you and express my appreciation to everybody who's come on to this study on today. I just want to remind everybody that although we are looking at history, this is 40 years ago that this World Tribunal was initiated. It occurred in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. And it was the beginning. This was the beginning. This was the event that transformed the question of reparations, demand for reparations inside the world, not just the United States, but throughout the world. Not only because there were people, Africans, who came from other places around the world who participated in some way or another with the tribunal, but also because almost immediately following the tribunal, I actually traveled the world taking the results, the consequences of the tribunal, especially throughout Europe and through Europe to various parts of Africa, and actually won support for the reparations demand for that we were putting forth from the Irish Republican Socialist Party, whose unity with our reparations demand, whose bold statement at a press conference that happened in Belfast, which at the time was occupied by British troops as a part of their colonial empire, who is shortly after this press conference where the Irish Republican Socialist Party came out in support of our demand for reparations and actually stated that they did not want any resources from any Irish person, group in the United States that did not support our struggle for liberation and reparations. That a day or so following that visit, my visit to Belfast, their office was torched, was burned down by the British government, which, as I mentioned earlier, was a colonial occupier, directly occupying Ireland at that time, and especially Northern Ireland. So this reparations demand, this reparations tribunal, is the thing that sparked the entire reparations mass movement. Up until this time, there was no mass movement for reparations. There were issues, there were people who pursued in some way or another reparations. One of the most noted of those persons was someone whose photo was shown during this overview, where we showed various photos as a part of a PowerPoint, was Queen Mother Moore. And she was an outstanding force who had fought for reparations for years and years and years. And there were others, not just Queen Mother Moore, but people who were influenced by and related to Queen Mother Moore, people from the Revolutionary Action Movement, people from the African People's Party. And there were various forces like that who did believe in reparation, but there was no mass movement for reparation. At best, what we saw was occasionally people like Robert Brock, and I'm throwing out names like this so that you can do your own research about them, who briefcase in hand traversed the United States and what have you, trying to win various entities to support the demand for reparations by African people. At best, this was the kind of work that was happening. But the African People's Socialist Party made a determination that for reparations to be meaningful, it had to be something that the masses of African people embraced. For the African People's Socialist Party, the reparations tribunal that we conducted, which was again the thing that turned the reparations demand in the United States into a mass demand, with the intent, the stated intent by the party, to make reparations a household word for it to be effective. This was the beginning of the real mass movement around reparations that was initiated by our party. And it was also a part of the process that we had initiated to rebuild a revolutionary movement. For us, the reparations demand was not simply a demand to get some resources, but we saw it as something that would give vitality, greater vitality to the struggle of our people for complete destruction of the colonial relationship that we have with the United States government. The African Revolution had come under fierce opposition, oppression, slaughter in some ways by the United States government. We mentioned during this PowerPoint presentation you just saw the issue of political prisoners, because we made the question of political prisoners a fundamental issue for this tribunal. We had people from around the world and in the United States who united with this demand that all of African political prisoners should be released, should be offered amnesty and various other forms of relief. But these political prisoners were a consequence of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. One of those purged political prisoners at this time was Sundiata Acoli, who just a few days ago, we understand was granted parole at 85 years of age. This is the system that we were dealing with and exposing as a part of the process to take back our total liberation. We didn't see reparations or this tribunal as an event, but we saw it as a part of the process to build a revolutionary project and to win our total liberation. So I wanted to say that this that the party was doing was also a part of a party building process. We're talking about a tribunal that occurred in November of 1981 and 82. And this is barely a year following the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that occurred in September of 1981. And that's meaningful this is the kind of work that our party has always done. It was a blistering pace of political work. And again, the objective was not to get some money or not to just have a capacity to do tribunals, but to put forth the tribunal as a means through which African people could reconquer our own power over our own lives. And the reparations demand, once grasped by masses of people, it was so significant because what it did was to take the masses of African people off the defensive. We were talking about a time similar to this time, where the U.S. government and all its thinking representatives from the left to the right of the colonizers had initiated this process of condemning African people for being some kind of anchor on the economic development, the progress of the United States, et cetera. And somehow we were some kind of burdens with welfare and social welfare projects and things like this. Well, the reparations demand, it was quite clear, was something that would take African people off the defensive and put us on the offensive. And at the point that African people understood that reparations was a real demand, it was something that African people had a right to. Then we transformed this movement so that it became clear that it's not African people who are living off the welfare of white people or the colonizer, but the colonizer. The whole white population in the United States and the world have been living off the welfare of Africa and African people for the last several hundred years. This was powerful. This was a part of the overall ideological war that we recognized that the African Revolution was engaged in, that many people did not understand because of the military defeat of the Black Revolution that had killed so many of our revolutionary leaders, which were also mentioned during this process of the tribunal itself. So we were consciously in the process of rebuilding the revolution, rebuilding and building the African People's Socialist Party, trying to move us beyond this crippling contradiction that we suffer from even today, of groups who were satisfied with some kind of small circle mentality, just to be out there by yourself, just doing this and doing that, single issues, and sometimes what might be looking like big issues, but with no objective of actually taking power, of actually governing and wielding power. And this was a form of opportunism, petty bourgeois neo-colonial opportunism. And so you had many forces who stood on the sideline, even building up, and some people will talk about this, building up for the tribunal that we did then, who stand on the sidelines now. The fact is that we need a massive army of revolutionaries. We need a massive army of people who are committed to the objective of taking power as a part of a struggle to destroy a social system that has its foundation on colonizing Africa and African people and oppressed peoples around the world. This was something that was brought out in the tribunal too. I hope you will have access and attain access. I know we're in the process of reprinting the Reparations Now book that came from the tribunal with some select quotes, some testimony from the tribunal. We're in the process of redoing that, but I'm hoping that you can access that and have, and even what has been done up to now, so that you get a deep, profound sense of what we did with that tribunal and pulling together so much information, so much history to show what we have later come to describe, but we were defining in so many ways throughout this process, even quoting Walter Rodney, as was done by Leonard Jeffers, Dr. Leonard Jeffers. But what we were exposing was that the colonialism is not just a policy. Jeffers talked about how colonialism, the Portuguese, I think it was 1882 that he was talking about, had initiated this, 1482, I think he was talking about, that initiated the El Mina on Ghana as a colonial project. But the fact is that colonialism moved beyond this single instance of policies coming from different powers. Even though it began in that fashion, it became a mode of production where the whole world economy rested upon a foundation of African enslavement and the colonial enslavement of Africa and peoples around the world. I think it's one of the things that was outstanding about this tribunal also was that it destroyed the notion of this United States monopoly on law and the definition of law. Most of us don't have any experience with law except that which is given to us by the United States itself. And many of the groups, organizations, some calling themselves radical and revolutionaries, are trapped also with this definition of law as imposed on us by the colonizer, and are too timid to even attempt to break free. Even during the process of building for this tribunal, we had problems with lawyers who wanted to take part, or indicated they wanted to take part, but were fearful of their participation, what it would mean in terms of them being able to continue to practice law in the United States, the loss of their law practice, their licenses. So we used the tribunal to extend the whole notion of the rights to the oppressed, to the colonized. Because if you're colonized, and your right to protest and proclaim that you're colonized and is dependent, and legally is dependent upon the colonizers giving you permission, then that's no right at all. And so what this tribunal did was consciously, purposely saying that we're challenging that whole notion that the people have a right and that the power of the people can achieve the ability to make a determination about colonialism and our oppression as a colonized people. We take that right. And this tribunal is evidence of taking that right. And that even though we will utilize what is now known as international law in order to do that, we do this in part as a political gambit to expose the fact that the United States doesn't give a damn about law. It just gives a damn about being able to control the world. We take that right ourselves. And in the process of taking that right, we create institutions of state power. And that for us, the tribunal was such an institution of state power, though not complete in the sense that we had not yet achieved the capacity to carry out the verdict of the tribunal, but that capacity is one that's being fought for and was being called for by the tribunal itself. So finally, I want to say also, that we had all kinds of struggles with building this. That didn't get spoken to in the actual overview that we've just done, the PowerPoint. But there are sectors of the so-called radical and Black nationalist African petty bourgeoisie that fought against us, that did not want this tribunal to be successful. And they didn't want it to be successful because within the struggle for national liberation, within the struggle against colonialism, there's a class war, class struggle is raging. And that there's ongoing attempt by sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie, sometimes sectors with guns, that would do everything they can to minimize the appearance of the African working class coming to its own, onto its own, and being able to determine the outcome of the struggle for African people. The African petty bourgeoisie, in all of its clothing, has determined that it is the force that will decide what, if any, future that African people will have. And so for the African working class to intrude into that process is something that's extraordinarily problematic for the petty bourgeoisie, like sometimes even the petty bourgeoisie with guns. And in fact, we were visited by some of them in the process of doing this who proclaimed that it was illegitimate because they didn't give us permission to do it, who were invited to be a part of a process to build this tribunal and to build the African National Reparations Organization that came out of that, but decided not to, and did not even begin to look at the reparations question seriously as a mass organization, even though they would come to the tribunals that we had subsequent to this one in New York in 1982. They would not commit themselves in meaningful way to reparations as a mass work until 1989, 7 years later, when Ronald Wilson Reagan, one of the biggest terrorists that had inhabited the White House, gave some pittance of reparations to the Japanese who had been imprisoned by the United States government during the Second Imperialist World War. When that happened, it turned many of them into active believers. This is the origin of, by the way, of INCOBRA, the National Coalition of Reparations for Blacks in America. So those are just some of the things that I think is really important. And I think it's also important that that this tribunal was something that demonstrated the absolutely necessary role of the advanced scientific revolutionary theory for guiding and making the revolution that will free us. In fact, the African People's Socialist Party was one of the few, was the only entity that I'm aware of that continued on the trajectory to make revolution as opposed to being satisfied with the consequences of our defeat. So we moved the reparations demand discussion beyond payment for slavery. That's what it was when we engaged in it. They were just talking about payment for slavery. But we, precisely because we are African internationalists and we have theory, and our theory helps us to understand that there's no static situation that somehow African people were enslaved, and then after slavery, things were cool, and now we want to just get paid for slavery or something to that effect. We understood that the whole social system had come into existence through the enslavement of African people, and that it was always at work. This colonial mode of production was always at work. It's at work even as we have this discussion now. It's at work with the last African who was killed any place in the world, who brutalized, who went to prison, who's trying to get out of prison, political prisoners still locked up. It's at work with all of the resources being stolen in terms of stolen labor, the resources that belong to Africa, the dreams, the hopes, the aspirations. This is part of what has been stolen from us. So we debunked this whole notion that reparations was just for slavery. And we also, because we showed with the document that we presented to this tribunal, that the rate of exploitation of African people was greater subsequent to slavery. And then finally, we established reparations as a function of the revolution. So that's part of what the consequences of this was. I expect to have a really dynamic and lively discussion. Some of the people who are on this panel today, Comrade Oronde, who was there when we were doing all that work in New York and saw the kinds of, and participated in building the tribunal and participated in the struggles that we had to overcome to make the tribunal happen, participated in trying to deal with the opportunist Black nationalist forces who were on the ground there in not just those who were there on the ground in New York, in Brooklyn, but also like the Jesse Jackson, who declared he could not support reparations demand that when we approached him because it was not germane at this time. Also to the most radical congressperson at the time in the United States, Ronald Dellums, who himself may have been characterized as a democratic socialist, and who refused to support the reparations demand because much of his constituency in the Berkeley arena were white labor people and white liberals, and who, while refusing to support our demand for reparations, when it came to the question of Japanese, actually stood in the Congress and actually shed tears supporting the demand for reparations by Japanese, which we support too and always have supported. But we supported the demand for reparations for Japanese by talking about how when he was 6 years old, some Japanese friend of his was carried off into concentration camps as Japanese were pushed into concentration camps. But there were all kinds of Africans in concentration camps at this time in California and throughout the United States and the world. And Dellums didn't have the courage or the principled relationship to the community that he would take a stance around that, which is a statement of just how significant the reparations demand was. I'm going to stop now, Comrade Director, and turn it over to you, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, I really want to just appreciate, again, your leadership, over the course of this, struggle to make reparations a household word. And, just for having this strategy to develop, this first World Tribunal and, as a part of this overall campaign. So I just really want to salute your leadership, this overview that you've given to today's discussion. And I'm very excited to talk to some of these panelists today. And I also just want to recognize part of that last statement that you made during your closing statements from the First World Tribunal about how the tribunal was moving from the assumption that African people will be free, must be free. And I know that, with the development of this tribunal and even our understanding of the demand for reparations, when we talk about like the verdict is in, this is moving from an assumption of African people seizing power to be able to act on the verdict. So just really want to, again, recognize the profound nature of that, because this is what we're talking about. All of the struggles and things that we're engaged in is about towards a struggle to seize that power, to be able to carry out the verdict that African people came to 40 years ago, that reparations are owed for everything that, from colonial slavery to everything that we've produced as a consequence of the colonial mode of production. So I just really want to salute that in this incredible analysis and go ahead and jump into this discussion and welcome some of our other panelists to this today. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be hearing also from Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Luwezi Kinshasa, the National Director of Organization Chimurenga Selembao, Comrade Oronde Shakur, and the African People's Solidarity Committee Chairwoman, Penny Hess. And to go ahead and, again, they're going to be discussing this historic event with us. And so I'm going to ask, each of them an individual question. And after, the questions, we'll open it up to our live audience, our viewers, you guys, to ask questions to our panelists as well. And for our panelists, please feel free to also engage with one another, pose each other questions or elaborate on different aspects of the discussion as well. Please, do not feel limited by these questions at all. We want to just have as much as a, deep, profound discussion as possible. So I'm going to start with Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, Uhuru SG, and wanted to ask you, as somebody who was impacted by the Reparations Tribunal, what did it mean for you to come from Congo to Europe to find the Reparations Now book, which the chairman mentioned, Reparations Now, at a bookstore in Paris?
Well, Dr. Kine, first of all, let me salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the leader of African Revolution, the World Revolution, and all the co-panelists who are participating to this historical event. The discovery of the book Reparations Now was a profound shock to me, basically. I was already in London by that time, and I was part of the organization, and the Black Unity and Freedom Party. And me and my wife went to Paris, and went to a bookshop called Présence Africaine, and I saw a book in English, and it was the only one in English. I didn't even ask them why. So I took that book, and I flipped through it. The few things I read, I said, wow, this is revolutionary. Who is this man? Who wrote this book? What is this organization? So I bought the book, and when I read it, it was profound, really profound. Profound to the point that often I don't say that the organization I was a part of at that time was in correspondence with the African People's Socialist Party. But nothing was shared. So I wasn't aware that, that was the case. So when I read the book, it's a lot of things, basically, really a lot of things to begin with. I belong to a generation, basically, that was born after the independence, so-called independence, or the flag independence of Africa. And we didn't know anything about the summation of the revolution, the Black Revolution, after the defeat. What was our tasks? What we were supposed to do. So when you have access to this book, to what the chairman has done, just a new world is opened to you. I have read by that time, people like Nkrumah, Fanon, Cabral, Marx, Lenin, and so on. But nothing really gave me a direct connection to the Black Revolution in the 60s in terms of continuum, what to do, why it didn't succeed, and what to go next. And this book basically was like a door, being opened. And by that time also it was accepted, that when you speak of theory, you are talking of Marx and Lenin and the others, but it's quite clear when you read Reparations Now, you can definitely see that Chairman Omali is an advanced theoretician in his own right. You can see that, laying things like we're fighting on our own terms. So it was just basically really, really profound, because he's giving a meaning to what it's meant to be an African revolutionary, what is a Black revolution, and things like that. Because we were growing up that everything has to be done when it comes to revolution secretively, clandestine. You don't do anything about the revolution openly. You don't do that. So that was a shock to me, that there is an organization, is a leadership that mobilizing African people, to complete the Black Revolution, but they are not hiding somewhere. They're doing it openly, and things like that. And you also, when you go through the book, here there is a summation, and this is a summation that basically saying it's a world view, it's an African working class world view. You never read anything like that before. To my knowledge, I haven't seen anything like that, And the centrality of Africa. I'm reading a book written by an African who is in the United States, but the centrality of Africa is throughout. And this definitely, can't fail to capture your imagination. The African identity is there. And the totality of Black freedom, the redemption of the African working class, because until that moment, you don't hear anybody raising not just the morale, just the stature of the African working class. You don't see that. You don't hear of anything like that from anywhere, and that was definitely a discovery, just powerful, groundbreaking kind of discovery, the redemption basically of the African working class. The United States has political prisoners. The only political prisoner we knew at the time, it was Nelson Mandela, because the bourgeoisie wants us to know about that. But in the U.S., had political prisoners. That was also a new, discovery, and particularly the conditions of Africans, African political prisoners. Like when you read the testimony of Mafundi Lake, that just went straight to your heart. He said, "This is not acceptable. This is the U.S. Wow, this is a country that calls themselves democracy and things like that. So there is no more pretension that United States is like a democracy and things like that. To me, that marked basically the profound, the rapture, the death of any presumption of innocence, or anything like that. From the U.S. and putting the United States government on trial. That was bold, putting the U.S. government, and as you might know by now, the United States by that time has already destroyed the Grenada Revolution. They have already attacked Nicaragua, Salvador, all those places. They have, that was basically things of the time. You couldn't, be conscious and not to know what the U.S. was doing. Ronald Reagan, what he was doing in Nicaragua, and funding the Contras and stuff like that. And so to put the United States on trial, the government responsible for the murder of Patrice Lumumba and so on, that was bold, and it resonated with me. And then, of course, you can extend that to people like Leopold II. When the U.S. is put on trial, to me, it's like Leopold II is put on trial. The French president, all of them being put on trial. So it was really a powerful statement, a powerful act. The use of international law in the hands of the African working class. All these things were within you. You're being introduced to another level. You are now in another place. The theory and its practice, because up to that moment, you only read theory, but in practice, you can't really, find where to relate with it. It's just something you're reading. You can go to different meetings. We can do demonstrations, but a struggle is informed by theory, and that theory is requiring you to build a tribunal. And in that tribunal, the United States government was found guilty. That was really, really profound. And also, it was an introduction, of course, to the U.S. front of African Revolution. So I heard other testimonies like Tupac's mom, Penny Shakur, and others. So basically, now you can connect. We listen to the tapes of Malcolm X and so on. Now you can see the revolution, although it was defeated, but it was still alive. So there is a new connection, new understanding of where to go, and things like that. The meaning of Black Power, that also, was something that came alive, because just the boldness to do the tribunal and to pass the guilty, a verdict, that was, definitely something that was profound, because now you can see that although we organize the tribunal, we don't have the set power to carry it out, but it's already a development. Black Power is not just a slogan. Now you begin to see in your brain a tribunal somewhere, the black people being organized and, developing capacity to carry out our decisions. All these things were definitely a leap forward for me. The summation of Black Revolution, of course, of the 60s. There is the Cabral, Malcolm X, the Lumumba, the all day. You will not see a summation like the chairman was doing, like what you discovered in the book. what's next? How do we move from the last period to the next period in between? What do we do? And it was just overwhelming when you read that. You see exactly, all those things are definitely resonating, and not only provide also a glue, to all the best practices coming from African and Arab oppressed people in anti-colonial struggles, because now you can understand, almost everything, because there's something that glues everything together. So that's basically what the book began doing for me, putting everything I've read, I've studied, or I've been part of together in a more coherent way to complete basically the Black Revolution. And just the notion, as I said, there's a theory out there, there is a worldview out there that, as a standpoint, the experience of African people, from the initial assault on Africa up to now, that was a groundbreaking breaking. It was a new light. And usually you will expect a theorization basically, to criticize like the Marx and Lenin, and to be against Marx, against Lenin, and the chairman didn't even do that. Just, you can see, is providing, worldview explanation and the work itself, but is moving beyond what Karl Marx and Lenin, have done. You can definitely feel it when you're reading through the book, and the tasks of the African proletariat. For me, that changed completely, because I have some notion of an African, Black working class, but now you can see the totality, the whole tasks of the African proletariat. Now you basically, your worldview, basically you're having now a fully developed worldview. You have access to that, where you can see totality. And the death of the white left. This book began for me the death of the white left, because you couldn't be in Europe without facing the white left. They are everywhere. Wherever you live, you see them, and from that day, it was just they became the past for me. So that book basically put me on that road. And the question, of course, of socialism. Here you can see that you can see a struggle in organization, in leadership, in theory. African working class is central, Africa is central, but what they're looking for is to build a new world, a socialist world. You couldn't see anything like that. Black power, socialism, all these things becoming coherent, part of the one thing, something like that. And so there are more things that, that can be said, but definitely the existence of a party, of the African working class, the existence of the African People Socialist Party. Because up to that moment, it was something I've seen Africans who led the struggle talked about, give reasons. We didn't win because we didn't have the political party of the African working class. That party didn't exist. We have to create that. And that was the first example, the first time I met the party of the African working class, being not a project, but being real, being in existence. And that was really a great discovery, because, as I say, Nkrumah and others are not there, and nobody left the African people with the party of the proletariat. And the chairman has done that, and that was just a groundbreaking. That party exists, that leadership exists, their theory exists, and things like that. So that was really that was profound. These are some of the things we wrestle with or struggle with to say, wow, what's this? From the time I put my hands on that book, and the rest is history. So I just want to appreciate the opportunity to be in part of this program and testify on the significance of the work the chairman led in 1982, and that's the last one, the publication of that book. I never seen African working class producing a book, and so organized, and that was profound too. So I want to stop there. Or
Uhuru, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, thank you so much for joining our program and just providing, just this experience, the impact and the significance of the tribunal, the fact that it had this extensive reach, across from the US and to Africans, throughout the world. And obviously we're seeing even greater impact of this tribunal today in the organizing efforts of the African People's Socialist Party. And you mentioned the book, Chairman mentioned a reprint of the book, and we'll talk about how you can volunteer to join the book production team for the reprint of Reparations Now. And just to say that Secretary General Luwezi is writing the introduction for the reprint of Reparations Now. So it all comes full circle. And we're going to bring on to this discussion our next panelist, Comrade Oronde Shakur, longtime supporter of the Uhuru Movement. And Comrade Oronde, you were on the ground in Brooklyn in 1982 as part of the party forces building for the first tribunal. So can you tell us about some of the work, some of the struggles, and the impact and significance that the tribunal had on you and just the community that you were organizing in, and how you kind of seen it played out in the world? So Uhuru, Comrade Oronde Shakur, welcome to our program. And yeah, we want to hear about that firsthand experience organizing on the ground.
Yeah, Uhuru, comrades. I want to first, of course, give appreciation to our leadership, the African People's Socialist Party, and my DOGG Chairman Omali Yeshitela for his leadership of the whole African working class and nation. This is a very important discussion and summation of that very historic, monumental moment when we had the tribunal for reparations for African people in the U.S. In 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. And some of the things that were stated by the Chairman Luwezi about that struggle and, our ability to organize during that period in New York to build a tribunal, and the forces and contradictions and opposition that we encountered building this tribunal. I've joined the party in 1981, early 1981. And just before the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And I was able to, fortunately, attend that historic Congress as well. And I was a neophyte. I just came out of working with the Black United Front and those forces. And I saw the Black United Front as a revolutionary organization. And some of the people who testified at the tribunal was also a part of that, like Joe Mashariki, who was the president of the Black Veterans for Social Justice. And I was the vice president. We founded that organization in 1979. And there was a lot of activity that I identified as being revolutionary. We had revolutionary leadership and ideas, and we were studying our history. We were involved with people like Maurice Bishop, who had won in Grenada with the New Jewels movement. We had forces from the Black United Front that was there when the U.S. invaded Grenada, et cetera. And there was a lot of activities that was happening with the Black United Front. And at the meeting, I ran into this comrade, brother named Mario Drummond, who was a member of the African People's Socialist Party, a fantastic organizer. And he recruited myself, I think Gaida and others into the party. Because at that point, the only way you can get into the movement was to join the party. Party was the vehicle to membership, and I was voted to go to the first Congress. And I'm just saying that in terms of providing a little history, because we understand that the tribunal wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the first party Congress, where the chairman put out this pamphlet, the political report to that first Congress called "The Struggle for Bread, Peace, and Black Power," the political report to the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And he raised in his book about, bread being representing, excuse me, the demand, to reflect the demand for reparation of Black people, for African people, for the years of stolen and unpaid labor, as well as the other effects of being colonized, socially, politically, economically, psychologically, etc. So when, and this is what pushed the party to have the tribunal to deal with that question of bread, of resources, of stolen wealth, and the oppression, the daily oppression of African people at that period, etc. It was important, I think, that tribunal happened in New York, because like one of the people has stated, not just New York, but Brooklyn, New York, more specifically, because it housed one of the largest African communities, in the world. Africans from all over the world live in that part of Brooklyn, New York. It is the place where Weeksville, which is one of the many communities that Africans right after slavery and doing reconstructions built what they described as these intentional self-reliant communities. And Weeksville, which turned out later on to be called Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, was one of those. And as people know about what they call Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Rosewood, etc. But all over the country, Africans created these independent communities, so that they can express, their will, their desire, their aspirations, and they understood the importance of having that control over their lives. So it was important to be there in Brooklyn, I think, because of the communities and the access to it. Being new in a real revolutionary organization that understood the question of class, was important, because we learned about that class struggle and the Black petty bourgeoisie and the opportunism of this class, firsthand by just trying to organize around tribunal in New York. All the big names, people who have notoriety in terms of being revolutionary, etc. A lot of those forces and organizations were headquartered in New York, and they were part of the Black United Front, which we came from initially. It was important, again, to have it there, and we looked at part of our work to organize. We was looking for venue. One of the main things, of course, is trying to get a venue to have these tribunals. And in New York, there's one of the largest public universities in the world is called CUNY. That's the public universities that run by the government. And it got 25 campuses. And of course, many of us graduated from some of those places, et cetera. So we were looking at what venue would make sense for this tribunal. And there's a college, part of CUNY, one of those 25 campuses is called Medgar Evers College. It was brought about by some of those same forces that was part of the Black United Front. Joe Mashariki being one of them, G2BC being another, etc., and some other selected Black politicians who struggled to bring that institution about in the name of Medgar Evers. So of course we felt, oh yeah, Medgar Evers College, of course that'd be ideal to celebrate Medgar Evers and his work and etc. and work done in the 60s. We just knew that was going to be the perfect spot, and we'd be met with open arms and etc. And that was not the case. And that is going to speak to the question of the Black petty bourgeoisie and their dominance over our communities, not only in terms of institutions, but also in terms of ideas. And I was disheartened by that, really, to tell you the truth, because I was expecting that would be automatic. And that's part of the narrow nationalist understanding that we had. You know, Black people, all Black people are going to be out for the interests of Black people. You know what I mean? And that's where the importance for us to understand that class analysis and the African working class getting its own voice, its own organization, and moving forward. And you're going to encounter opposition. And it's going to be white power and blackface. You're going to be the Black petty bourgeoisie. And we had to run in with them from day one, every day. We went to events that they had. It was hostile, etc. But we went anyway because that's where the people were. We brought this magnificent journal with us, the Burning Spear, the spear that got me to join the party in the first place. You know, so the masses there, and we were able to put out the Burning Spear that was speaking about the reparations, etc. We did flyers all over New York. We knew we had to try to hit every borough. There's 5 boroughs. We were successful, of course, in Brooklyn, Queens, and Harlem. And we was on our way trying to build something up in the Bronx. Staten Island was out of the question. That's the hotbed of the police live there, and the fire and all the other reactionary kind of folks. If we had an African who was willing to do work, we definitely had done that. But we hadn't found anybody out in Staten Island. It was a problematic just getting to Staten Island because it's separated with the bridge and et cetera, to get there. But we was doing serious outreach, tabling. We was trying to get the Black media, to, you know, support that. A couple of them did. We did get an article in the Amsterdam News. If you don't know about the Amsterdam, it's a Black petty bourgeois newspaper. They got a history with the leadership of the Black petty bourgeois in New York. They had a radio station. You know, just they ran and won the borough presidency in Manhattan, etc. I didn't understand all that, you know, until I joined the party. We understood the class analysis and the Black petty bourgeoisie and how entrenched they are, even in our own ideas, you know what I mean? Because I just came out from the Black United Front, like I said. We even had to deal with, of course, we usually talked about the white left who wanted to be, you know, felt they had to be, wanted to be a part of the process. What they meant was to lead the process, of course. And we had to neutralize that sector. We had to fight with them. They wanted to come to the event and all that kind of thing. So we was learning on the run about the African working class. And Luwezi's right. We have just, through our work and African International, understanding ourselves as a conscious class of the African working class. When, you know, that's a powerful, you know, mindset to look at the world from the eyes of an African working class person involved in revolutionary struggle. And the world does open up to you, and you see it and you view it differently. Thankful again to 1972, when the party itself formed, was a leap forward for the African working class. And then to have almost a year later, the tribunal for reparations for African people in the USA, and to have it under the leadership of a revolutionary African working class organization, where we are speaking our own interests and aspirations, and not begging for, like the chairman was talking about, we wasn't begging for the ruling class to give us the big payoff, like James Brown said, the big payback. You know what I mean? We understood and understand that reparations means African revolution. You know what I mean? We're gonna pay ourselves when we snatched from the hands of the colonizers our resources, our land, and our life, and our own ideas, our correct ideas in terms of the African working class. So the seriousness of the tribunal, if you when you were there, not only was it revolutionary, it was professional. The ambiance of the tribunal itself, and we had it done at one of the colleges that was part of this public CUNY university. It was called New York Technical College, and in 1982, 51% of the student population were African. You know what I mean? So that was significant because we wanted a lot of support from student organizations. And Joe Mashariki he was an adjunct professor at this college. And that's part of the reason why we were able, when we was turned down by Megas, that we were able to get this college to let us host it there. And he had a lot of African students. So I guess in their mind that this was just something that was supported by the student organizations on campus, et cetera. So they allowed the event to happen in that venue. And it was important that it was there because, again, the student population was over 50% African. And then you had a large Latinx population as well. Today, unfortunately, only I think 30% of the population of that institution is African. And the venue was raised and they built this corporate looking structure. You know what I mean? They may have did it just because they remembered that the tribunal was there, you know? So, but in any case, it was a fierce struggle, but it was a magnificent struggle. It was a beautiful struggle because we won out, and the tribunal was able to happen. And you've seen, I'm looking at the presentation today, and it just reinforces in my mind how dynamic, how profound and fundamental that tribunal was for the African working class in our struggle to gain our freedom and independence and the unification and liberation of our motherland, Africa. You know what I mean? And that was a very important event. It was important to me as trying to learn to be a revolutionary, to be conscious of myself as an African working class person, and that explains why you took certain stances before you even understood what the African working class was. You was taking those stances anyway. But with African International and the African People's Socialist Party, now you have the theory. Now you have the worldview in order to practice African working class work and perspective. So, it was a total victory. checkmated the white left, checkmated the black petty bourgeoisie. A lot of them was, put their name on the flyers, but you have passive supporters and you have active supporters. And then you have those, of course, who were trying everything in their power to make sure that this didn't happen, because it threatened not just the ruling class, that the big bourgeoisie, the white colonial capitalist class, but it tied to that is the African petty bourgeoisie. So they saw it as a threat to their privileges and benefits, and et cetera. And since they weren't leading it, you know what I mean? So, they took the position to be in opposition to it, and they lost. And we heard about all the people like Queen Mother Moore, who was there, and Queen Mother Moore, who, reparations were, I think she, she was recruited to UNIA, when she heard Marcus Garvey speak in Louisiana on Black nationalism. And she left Louisiana and moved to Harlem, and she became part of building the conventions in New York, for Garvey. And she was one thing she used to say, that you can't give guns to Negroes. You know what I mean? Because what she said is that they're not going to use it and aim it in the right direction. You know what I mean? She's like Harry Tubman kind of thing. So, but Queen Mother, when she was at Nkrumah's funeral in Ghana, the Ashanti people gave her the honorary title of Queen Mother for her work and dedication and sacrifice. And, she's one of the first revolutionaries that I met, when I came home from the military. And, and through Joe's real close to Queen Mother, as well as the chairman. It was real important for her to be at that event, for her to be there and represent, UNIA, et cetera, at the event. So that was important. Lastly, I'm just going to say that in terms of what Chairman laid out in his presentation about, the continuity of our struggle, a lot of people at that event even testified, et cetera. And this is the importance of having theory and having it led by the African working class. It was clear about, our objective is to, we have nothing to lose but our chains, is that a lot of those forces today, it was left up to the black petty bourgeoisie, that would have been an event done, and that's it. And there would be no more, and maybe they would have went off and got paid somewhere, and that'd have been the end of it. But because we have a revolutionary vanguard, African working class revolutionary party who understood in the first place that this tribunal is connected to revolution, African revolution on an international scale. You know what I mean? It's not going to be any payoff, payback, et cetera, until we get power to pay ourselves by taking back everything that was taken from us. And those people who's responsible for taking that in the process of colonizing us, and the brutality and the death, and humiliation, and all the other kind of things that go along with colonialism, have to pay. That will be a payback, because some of them are going to be jailed, and some of them going to see the man, firing squad, et cetera. That's going to be a payback. That's the reparation payback that we mean, you know what I mean? In terms of total African freedom and independence, a liberated, united Africa under the leadership of the African working class and its revolutionary party. You know what I mean? And that's what 1972 was, when the formation of the party happened. That's what 1981 was with the first Congress, and that's when 1982 it was in terms of the tribunal and all the other tribunals that happened afterwards, and all the African People's Socialist Party Congresses after that, all the way up to today. And this event today is part of that same process that began clearly in 1492 or before. So I really appreciate being a part of this panel to discuss that historic, monumental tribunal, you know, and the work of the African People's Socialist Party and my DOWG chairman, Omali Yeshitela, deputy chair, owner Yeshitela, to the whole African People's Socialist Party Central Committee, all the leadership, you know, of the party and its institutions. You know, I really appreciate participating in this process today and being in this movement. Uhuru, one Africa, one nation.
Uhuru, Oronde, One Africa, One Nation. Just really want to salute your work and everything that you just laid out in not just talking about your personal participation in the putting together of the 1982 World Tribunal, but you going really deep into the class question and the struggles that occurred as a process of getting the tribunal to even occur. And you know, I think that's really important because the tribunal didn't just happen. It wasn't just something that, you know, we had this brilliant idea that we needed to get it done and we were just able to execute it without this kind of intervention from white power and the, you know, and the African petty bourgeoisie. And it's just, it sets the tone for the African People's Socialist Party itself since its founding and the leadership of the chairman and the word that we've been using to characterize the party's 50-year anniversary, which is this year, the word relentless. Because everything the party has achieved, everything the African working class has achieved, has never come through a process of begging or belly crawling. It has come through a process of relentless struggle. And Comrade Oronde laid out, you know, going and selling the spear, tabling all forms of outreach, going up against the African petty bourgeoisie. The chairman talked about some of those struggles as well. And, you know, that is the kind of work that the African People's Socialist Party has been engaged in continuously. As Oronde said, this is a part of a continuum, this tribunal and even this discussion. And that's the kind of, you know, relentless nature in which all the, you know, the members of our party, Uhuru Movement, and all of those coming into this movement have to really embody is, you know, the relentless struggle that Comrade Oronde just illustrated for us. So I really want to appreciate, Oronde, you being a part of this program, you laying out that really profound history and that African internationalist analysis of the significance of this tribunal. And to continue this discussion, I want, before we continue, I want to just make sure that everyone who is either joining us right now or has been on with us since the beginning to keep liking and sharing this video in the process, because this is a topic that deserves a lot of engagement. And again, because this reparations demand did not disappear in the mainstream, but it has happened as a consequence of the leadership of the chairman and the work of the African People's Socialist Party for more than 40 years. So we need to get this discussion out into the world, continue to like and share this video widely. So I would like to bring up our next panelist, the National Director of Organization, Chimurenga Selembao. Uhuru Director Chimurenga, you were organizing. Uhuru. Oh, I'm getting a little feedback, but you were organizing around the tribunal in St. Petersburg, Florida, and brought a contingent to Brooklyn, New York. Tell us about your impression and the impact and significance of this tribunal.
First, I want to thank you for certainly to this panel, and also want to salute you, the African Nation Chairman Omali Yeshitela. The chairman was the person who inspired the World Tribunal Reparations to African people in the U.S. and it reverberated all around the world. I appreciate the comment.
Chimurenga, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's coming in a little choppy.
But you end up breaking up on your end. Is it any clearer right here?
No, it's still a little choppy. I'm thinking your connection is a little spotty.
Oh, uh, see if it works.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and bring up our next panelist, Chimurenga, if you want. Can you come on? Can you drop off and come back on for us? And hopefully that helps to stabilize it a little bit. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. All right. So while we resolve those technical issues, we're going to go ahead and move it to our next panelist. Going to be bringing up the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess. Uhuru, Penny, welcome to our program. Thank you for joining us this morning. You were organizing in Brooklyn as the African People's Solidarity Committee. Can you tell us about the response from the North American community and the significance that you saw of the tribunal?
Uhuru, and thank you so much, Director Akile. It's such an honor to be here today, and I certainly want to join in saluting Oronde Shakur and his brilliant summation, National Director of Organization of the party, Chimurenga Selembao, and Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, and of course, Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela, who so all of us of the African People's Solidarity Committee have the honor of working under her leadership, but it is an honor to be here. It is an honor to have been there in 1982 as a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And of course, I have to salute the incredible leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, and everything that we know and could see on that audio presentation earlier, and on Chairman's summation and everything that he's done subsequently, that the Chairman and the party are known to be relentless, bold, fearless, indicted the US government and the whole colonial mode of production, and used it, as has been already so brilliantly summed up, to fight for the interests of the African working class around the world. And again, I had the honor of being there in Brooklyn in November of 1982. I agree with what has been said, that it was a monumental and historic event that has impacted the world, that has changed the world, and that has been just an incredible tool towards advancing the total liberation of Africa and African people everywhere, as others have summed up. And we see the impact in France for Secretary General Luwezi, who saw the book in Paris and said, I think that one of the things that struck me then and is so important and critical now and continues to be true now is the fact that this was not just an event, as the chairman says in it, it is not a mock trial. It is based on the assumption of state power, which is something that all the work of the party has carried out and continues to, from the Black Power blueprint to the building of the tribunals and all of the work of the party, the African Socialist International, and just the ability of the party to lead on every question around the world, and that it used international law as a tool for the building and fighting for the ability of the African working class to assume state power. And you saw that in the eloquence of how the chairman laid it out as a leader of the African nation in every way, the professionalism of the event itself, and the fact that it assembled some of the greatest African thinkers and workers and community leaders, and brought them all together and gave them a cohesion towards a trajectory of African revolution, which was brilliant, and it reverberates today and impacts today. And one of the points that the chairman laid out as the people's advocate in the tribunal was that the verdict indicted the US, demanded $4.1 trillion in reparations, which today would be about $15 trillion. And that was for stolen labor alone, not for all of the other things, and even for what has been extracted from African people since 1982 would have to be added, not to mention the profound trauma and pain and suffering that white people and the colonial system have impacted onto African people all throughout since the last 600 years. And I think that the thing that the chairman said is that that this was not a mock trial. It was African people seizing power, but without the ability to have state power to enforce the verdict. And it was something that, as it ends, the chairman is calling on the African world and those in solidarity with African people to take up this question, because African people will be free. And it was an anti-colonial revolutionary demand for reparations. And I do want to say that, things in the world don't just change by themselves. They change because people have fought a war of ideas to change the world, a war of theory and practice. And that is what Chairman Omali Yeshitela did and continues to do every single day of his life. That reparations was not a household word. It was not something you read about in the newspaper. It was not something that during a demonstration that African people all over the US or all over the world stood up and fought for, or even had placards or anything like that. And it certainly was not something that the white left or white people stood up and fought for and took a stand around. That was won by the African People's Socialist Party. And this was 1982, before the internet, before mobile phones. It was in the Reagan years, Chairman said, and it was in the wake of a brutal counterinsurgency that had assassinated and brutally murdered and imprisoned African leaders, destroyed organizations from the revolutionary movement of the 60s, imposed drugs and crack cocaine, and was something that was about mass imprisonment of African people. And you were seeing rapid prison building all over the US, criminalizing the African population. And here was this voice. And I think that the party was the only voice that was about bringing the question of reparations to the masses of African people. And to just say that, yeah, there was no internet, the party members drove across the US from California to New York and wheat pasted reparations posters in cities and towns all across the way. It was if there was some obstacle that could be overcome, the party has always done that. And even the formation of the African People's Solidarity Committee and this whole colonial question, the chairman solved the problems and defeated, as has been said, the white left assumption of hegemony and control over African people in the wake of the counterinsurgency defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s that we have seen that the chairman took on. The chairman solved the problem. Who are the white people and what to do with them? And the chairman has shown that the question of reparations is key to what it means for white people to take a revolutionary stand based on this understanding of the colonial mode of production, that everything that white people have comes at the expense and stolen from and was produced by African people and colonized of the earth. And white people, all white people, owe reparations because everything that we have comes at their expense. And this is an idea that has permeated the world. And it is clear now that reparations is a mass demand because of what Chairman Omali Yeshitela did, and even the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee to take the reparations question behind enemy lines is so critical. And I just want to say that, you know, today there's just a host of books and academics, white academics, who are investigating and talking about reparations and even showing how the US economy and world economy was built from colonialism and the assault on Africa and African people and the forced kidnapping and trafficking and theft of African labor. But you know, they don't acknowledge that this came from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that they are taking ideas that have been fought for among the African working class, and they are attempting to build their own careers on this. But in any case, that the understanding that the chairman has put out, that all white people are part of the colonizer and sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, and to recognize our violence that has carried that out. The party fought for the African working class. Chairman Omali Yeshitela was brilliant, fearless. The Reparations Tribunal, the first tribunal in Brooklyn, and all of the 12 subsequent tribunals held in cities throughout the US and in Europe have forever changed the political terrain of the US and the world. And it's just an incredible honor to be a white person under the leadership of this fight, this incredible leadership of the Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is the leader of the African nation and who is responsible for creating the trajectory of the future of this planet, that all people have an interest, if we want to be part of a future in which human beings can live, no one at the expense of anyone else, then join the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So again, this is profound. I'm so honored and so happy that we are discussing this today and really bringing the significance of this as one of the many, many leading events and programs of the African People's Socialist Party that is leading towards the liberation of Africa and African people everywhere. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny. Uhuru, unity through reparations. It was kind of like cut off for you a little bit, but thank you so much, Chairwoman Penny of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And just what a significant example, like practical example of reparations in action, where the party not only set out to make reparations a household word, but actually set out to make reparations something real, tangible that can be achieved today. And the existence of the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the organization of white people, the colonizer population working under the leadership of the African working class, in the form of the African People's Socialist Party and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, returning stolen resources back into the hands of the African Revolution. This is a real, real lifetime practical implementation of reparations. So just wanting to recognize that, and just also say that reparations, we've taken this demand and the chairman has defined it as a revolutionary demand, that reparations is a revolutionary demand. We use the struggle of reparations to further the struggle against colonialism and the colonial mode of production. So thank you, Chairwoman Penny. We have Director Chimurenga with us back. Chimurenga, you want to just do a couple test lines for me so I make sure that this goes smoothly?
Okay. Uhuru, testing 1, 2, 3. Any better?
It's still choppy. It's still a little choppy.
Yeah, maybe a network.
Why don't we try? Let's try turning your camera off. And what we can do is work to try to get a photo of you on screen. Let's see if that makes a difference.
Okay. Uhuru, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
That might be a little better.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. I didn't turn it on. I turned it off. Is it sounding better now?
It does. Sounds a lot better.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I just want to appreciate the leader of the African Nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And I heard your question, and I think it's a really important one in relationship to the World Tribunal on reparations to African people in the U.S. The chairman was the inspiration for this World Tribunal, and it was his idea and his motivation and his drive that drove all the other people in the party and our supporters to make this a real trial, because one of the criticisms was, and I can't remember if it was somebody from the bourgeoisie, but they call it a mock trial. And it was that's nothing could be further from the truth. It wasn't a mock trial. As a matter of fact, it was the first fair trial in the United States. Before or since, first fair trial, where evidence and proof is actually used to convict the oppressor. And I think that was one of the really important things about this trial, is because the testimony was absolutely riveting. To hear Comrade Mafundi Lake talk about and testify to the fact of how he spent 12 years in solitary confinement, using toilet paper, sleeping on a floor, a bare floor, using toilet paper to pretend that he had covers over himself. That was absolutely riveting. But it was not just riveting, it was also part of the proof that the US was guilty of crimes against humanity, crimes against the African nation. And I think it set up, many discussions have been held since that tribunal. We held a number of tribunals, 11 years in a row after that, gathering more evidence. And the final outcome of that 1982 tribunal was to say that the US owed African people $4.1 trillion in labor alone. And I think that's a really important point to make, that it was labor alone. It was not for damages, which we have not calculated at this time, but we would imagine that the damages are going to go way beyond $4.1 trillion, more than 4,000 African people lynched in the United States, and police killing African people on a daily basis in the United States, sometimes on video in live and living color, putting pressure on their necks until they're dead, and then they get 22 years to come out and do the same thing again. So I think the testimony of people like Leonard Jeffries, who laid out just a tremendous historical basis for the tribunal and what African people had been through and what the colonial capitalists did in the development of capitalism to bring us to where we were in 1982, but even beyond, because that analysis could certainly be done today and be just as accurate. The chairman has talked about the colonial mode of production. This is a recent discovery that the chairman made and theoretical proposition the chairman has put out into the world. And I think the tribunal is an excellent example of probably one of the things that helped them get there, hearing these days of testimony of Africans from all over the US talking about, from prisons to police brutality to the very founding of the US itself, through expert testimony of people who have suffered at the hands of the colonial system like Mafundi Lake. And I think it was just a tremendous effort by the African working class to exert our authority out there in the world. And as the chairman has stated many times, the only thing that was missing was state power. But in fact, that tribunal was certainly an example of the African working class now exerting itself and showing that what we were really fighting for was power. Not crumbs, not integration, but power. And all these testimonies, I think, were an excellent example of what we're talking about and how a real trial. By the way, I think it's important to note that the US government was given an opportunity to defend itself, and it did not. So when I say it's the first fair trial in the United States of America, I truly mean that. Again, I want to thank Chairman Omali Yeshitela for all he's done for the African Liberation Movement, building the African People's Socialist Party, building the World Tribunal on reparations for African people in the U.S. And one thing I just wanted to reiterate that Oronde said, and that was how only 10 years after the founding of the party itself, then we build the chairman calls for the building of the World Tribunal on Reparations. So I think it was a real historic event, more than an event. It was a real trial that gathered evidence, not just in 82, but the 11 years following 1982. So I want to thank Director Akile for helping me be part of this panel. I hope I was coming through clearly. And Vanguard, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Director Chimurenga, that was crystal. Thank you so much. And I'm just appreciative that we were able to have your contribution to this panel as well. And just want to take a moment to salute all of our panelists. And of course, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You cannot hear about a history like this anywhere else. This type of work characterizes our party over the last 50 years. So we're going to be going into a brief Q&A with our panelists, with our live audience. But first, we want to just take a look at a couple of announcements from our movement. So you have heard this incredible study today discussing the significance of the historic 1982 World Tribunal on reparations to African people. Burning Spear Publications is calling for volunteers who want to get involved in publishing the new edition of the book, Reparations Now, that the chairman mentioned earlier, which includes testimonies, verdicts, and analysis from the Reparations Tribunal. Contribute your time and skills with the book publishing division of Burning Spear Media and help produce and promote African internationalist books, pamphlets, posters, and more. Transcribe, proofread, design graphics, layout, and work on promotions for this book project. Register for our open volunteer meeting scheduled for next Saturday, June 18th, 5 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Go to tinyurl.com/2022 publications. Burning Spear Media has a new online store. You can get there by going to the burningspear.store. Order your Spear bundles, books, and pamphlets, written by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, posters, gear, and so much more. Again, this is our new online store, the burningspear.store. So shop with us. This material, the Reparations Now book, will be published and it will be sold on this platform. Go ahead and set up your Spear subscriptions, your Spear bundles right on the burningspear.store. Very exciting. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. And Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. So book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru Movement speakers for your campus or organization now, and you can email info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. So that's to book the chairman and any Uhuru Movement speaker at your campus or organization event, but you definitely want to get Chairman Omali Yeshitela to speak, and again, going through Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau. And finally, just in terms of upcoming events, go to theburningspear.com/events calendar to see everything that's going on within the Uhuru Movement, all of our organizations. You can be a part, how to join, how to participate, volunteer, or how to attend. So go to theburningspear.com/events. So that concludes our announcements, and just want to tag at the end of this that if you have been a part of this discussion now and you have been impacted by what has been laid out and you are wanting to join this struggle, to be a part of this relentless struggle to pursue the redemption of Africa, then you need to join the African People's Socialist Party, because it is the only revolutionary vehicle out here that is capable of making the African Revolution, that has been doing this work consistently, as you see right here in this whole discussion. So you need to be a part of this movement. Join the African People's Socialist Party today. Do not wait another day. In fact, I've seen several forces throughout the world today saying that they, are interested in this movement, want to become a part of this movement. And so you have the opportunity to do that right now, today, no matter where it is that you're located. You're an African that wants to be a part of this struggle. Join the African People's Socialist Party. Visit apspuhuru.org to join, fill out our contact form. So that will conclude our announcements. We're going to come back to our panelists and taking some questions from our live audience. So I just want to welcome onto the screen Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, Director Chimurenga, Comrade Oronde, and APSC Chairwoman Penny, to take a couple of questions from our live audience. And just to say where people have been viewing from throughout, we have Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Missouri, Moorhead, Minnesota, Huntsville, Alabama, Oakland, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Fort Myers, Florida, Portland, Oregon, San Diego, California, Wichita, Kansas, Brooklyn, New York, Barbados, Marion County, Georgia, Sierra Leone, occupied Azania or South Africa, St. Petersburg, Florida, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Grenada, West Indies, Bermuda, Cincinnati, Ohio, Los Angeles, California, Newark, New Jersey, and Lakeland, Florida have tuned in with us today. So shout out to all of you who checked in. Thank you all so much for watching. And just briefly want to shout out Black Power 96 radio team that's been airing this Omali Taught Me Sunday Study over the airways of Black Power 96, and salute Comrade Station Manager Eddie Maltzby, and our volunteer radio programmer, Comrade Larry Faison, who's down there helping with Mr. Eddie to broadcast this today. So thank you to our BP96 team. All right, so let's get into these questions. Welcome back, panelists. Thank you all so much for your time. So one of our questions is coming from Comrade Matsamela, who he didn't direct the question, but I'm assuming this is for Comrade Oronde. And Comrade Oronde, you've already spoken to this significantly in your presentation, but Matsamela wanted to know, in terms of the experience of outreach on the ground, could you explain the excitement of the people, the reaction from the people regarding this tribunal occurring? And again, this is open to all of the panelists. So if you guys want to, if you want to contribute to any of the questions, please feel free. But I believe that's directed to Comrade Oronde. Also, Comrade Oronde, you have a question from Omar who says, please someone tell me where I can buy this t-shirt and the caps that he is wearing. So if you want to try to tackle both of those right now, Uhuru, Comrade.
Yeah, Uhuru. When I was speaking about the tribunal in '82 and our defeat of those forces that were in opposition to the tribunal, it was the masses themselves who won the idea of reparations. That was our purpose. That was the overall arc, is to make reparations a household word, name, idea in the African community. And though the misleadership of our community, those forces represented by the Black petty bourgeoisie were in opposition, contrary to that, the masses themselves was excited by the idea of reparations. They knew that somehow we needed to be paid for our stolen labor. So we didn't have problems winning the workers, the African working class, to this idea and to support it. And like I said, we had active supporters and non-active, and people, when we had donation cans out during this process, we collected donations from the people themselves to see that this event happened. And we sold enormous amount of burning spears around the tribunal. So we didn't have any problems winning the people. Just trying to get past the people that were in the way of that process. That was the problem. And for a minute. But we was able to overcome that and get the message to the people on the streets, in the hood, you know what I mean? In the barbershops, you know what I mean? Even in the churches, etc. To support that in so many ways. If they didn't attend, they did support in terms of buying the spear, taking the literature, allowing us to post information about it in their stores or institutions, etc. So the people were excited about the notion of reparations. That was, real organizing victory in terms of knowing that the people themselves, supported the tribunal and what it represents in terms of, helping us reach the goals of self-determination and freedom. So that was a good struggle. That's what I meant by it was a good struggle, because we was entrenched in the masses themselves, you know what I mean? And that inspired us to continue doing the work because of the responses we was getting from the people in our communities, you know what I mean, who united with that, generally united with that notion of reparations. And I gather from them reading the spear, they got a deeper understanding of what reparations meant. If they went to attended the event, they definitely got to hear and understand what reparations meant, and means, etc. So we didn't have no problems with the people. We had problems with the people trying to stop us from getting to the people.
Uhuru, I'd like to, if I may, just contribute to Comrade Oronde's presentation. The fact of the matter is that we did have mass support, and the people didn't make the same kind of narrow distinction between reparations and the revolution as is made by the professional reparations people then and now, as the petty bourgeoisie, who only could see it in terms of payoff. And yes, the people do want the resources and need the resources, et cetera. But an example of what I'm talking about is that sometimes when we just be walking down the streets in a group in Brooklyn, and the people give us real startling response to it. When people would step back and really just appreciate our presence. It's not even like we were uniformed or anything like that, but there was a stance that was very obvious that we had, and the people latched onto that immediately. And so I just want to say that the people had no problem with the reparations demand. It's only the petty bourgeoisie. And like I said, sometimes radical petty bourgeoisie and sometimes even petty bourgeoisie with guns, but not the masses of the people, not the workers. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Oronde, and thank you, Chairman. Just very exciting to be able to know about, how one, the party has always rooted itself in the African masses and has always recognized that that's where we have to organize. And we can just, again, see the practical evidence of that strategy, working, and how we also understand the reparations demand that for that demand to be realized, it requires this demand for reparations to grip the minds, imaginations of the masses of African workers, because that's where reparations happens. It's on the right there in the ground with the masses of African workers. So just really want to appreciate that. This next question is coming from Comrade Jamal. He asked, how important has the neo-colonial strategy been for the colonizer in their attempts to steal the narrative and process of reparations from the chairman and the party in what seems to be a clear attempt of transforming reparations from a revolutionary demand into bourgeois reform?
I'd like to address that, if I may, because I think that's an important question, because the truth of the matter is, when we first raised the reparations issue, our objective was to get everybody to unite with it. Petty bourgeoisie, everybody, preachers, whomever we could win. And that was not an easy thing for the African petty bourgeoisie in general to do, and especially the liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie. In fact, some of the people who became most ardent supporters of quote unquote reparations initially were opposed to it. I've told you what Jesse Jackson said in terms of how reparation was not germane. I told you the stance of Ronald Dellums, who was this great militant socialist out of Berkeley, California. The fact is that there were, clearly sectors of the African, petty bourgeoisie who were not going to unite with the reparations demand. And but the party did extremely significant work, and we always saw the reparations question as part and parcel of building the party and building the revolution. And I want to be clear on that, building the party and building the revolution, because as you just suggested, Comrade Jamal, there are a lot of people who now have been able to embrace reparations. I remember Randall Robinson, when the reparations demand was first put forth, Robinson was not one of the supporters, but he made a career out of reparations issue with the book he wrote on called The Debt. And it's not a coincidence that he came up with the same total in terms of what's owed to African people as what had previously been published from the tribunal that we had. So people will do that and have done that. But Comrade Oronde is absolutely correct. And I think we should hear what he just said, because the point is that genuine reparations we'll pay ourselves. The thing is taking back our resources, expropriating the expropriators. And that's one thing. Two, the other thing is that there's a major difference that the party took up the question of the reparations, the advanced attachment of the African working class, because the reparations issue means something quite different for the African working class than it does for the African petty bourgeoisie. And so the party took this question on, was able to mobilize all kinds of people who previously were opposed to it, didn't have the audacity to say it if they did believe in it. The party threw our bodies on the grenade. And so now made it possible for people to talk about reparation, holding tribunals, having respected intellectuals like what we saw at the first tribunal. This was really, really important. And the other thing that's extremely important is yes, Comrade Jamal, the African petty bourgeoisie and other forces trying to jump on and will jump on, and they're expecting a payoff from the US government, and the government will give them a welfare program depending on the depth of the crisis of imperialism. But we've always recognized that the power for reparations in the people, and all the people, not just Africans, of course, but all the people. That's where the reparations demand is going to come from, even to the extent of winning the revolution in the United States. And specifically, what we've done is mobilize a sector of the colonizer population who rescues itself from oblivion or makes itself oblivious. The colonizer population works extremely hard under the leadership of the party, pushing the reparations demand throughout the colonial population. It's much greater, much more significant than it ever would have been without the party, without having this force in the colonized community, working in 130 some odd cities and more than 30 states in the United States alone, pushing the reparations demand. So it's the people. And it's the ability of the African People's Socialist Party to win the people to the revolution, where the reparations demand simply is one of its functions. Uhuru.
Yes, well, if I may just add these few things, basically. One thing the party has been able to demonstrate, because we already asked this question, who is to lead? And the reparation work is already an answer to that question. Who must lead this era, this new round, this phase of African national liberation struggle? Is the African petty bourgeoisie or the African working class? If the African working class has to lead it, then it has to be led by its own party. And the 1982 tribunal is a concrete example of that. And not only is a concrete example of that, you can see that every time the African petty bourgeoisie has led the struggle for reparation, not only it goes along what the chairman just said, it's for a paycheck, but also for things like cancellation of the debts. You know, all these engineered debts, which itself part of the accumulation of capital that capitalism cannot survive without, the ongoing colonization of Africans. So many African leaders, some even the government, also want to get involved. If you listen carefully, you will see reparation is just a demand. It's a bargaining power. So they can say, listen, we can unleash, the African working class, which they can't, because it's a threat to themselves too. But it's a way to bargain with the colonizers, so the colonizers can, cancel debt and stuff like that. But the question of reparation definitely is a dividing line between the African working class and the African petty bourgeoisie. Although, as I said, the African petty bourgeoisie, recognize the question of reparation, organize, from place to place around that. But the African working class must absolutely get reparation as a part of a process, not just one day or a promise, but as a process, just like the party does it. That requires basically recognition that the white people has to work under the leadership of the African working class. And you see the African petty bourgeoisie organizing around reparation, making alliances with the white colonizers, but don't ever make a request. The African work the white people, the white colonizers, have to work under the leadership. You don't see them doing anything like that. And the reparation, definitely, you can't talk about African history or African just. You can't talk about colonialism, just that's something as most white people often like to do. That's something that happened in the past. Reparation is what basically will make a determination. Yes, you unite with a shared future where there is no colonizers and colonized people. So reparation needs to be done. Reparation has to happen, and the African working class is the only one to do it through under the leadership of the African working class. This way, oppressors can talk about rejoining humanity because they are doing the work of reparation under the African working class, and African petty bourgeoisie cannot do that. That is really something I want to say. And also, I might just add, as the struggle develops now, people are aware a lot of things happening. There are pockets of a struggle erupting all over Africa. It's happening so fast that sometimes you can't even say why. It already happened. There are demonstrations here, there. It's just happening every day. But the point I want to make is that you're going to see this, the ingenuity of the chairman of bringing the question of reparation as a function of the revolution. We're going to see that. I take one example: the CFA, the currency, the French franc, the domination of the currencies of so-called 14 francophone African countries. Listen to the bourgeoisie; they're struggling around that. But if you listen to the demand, but you will see there is not a single leadership who is demanding for reparation. No one is organizing, trying to say we're going to win oppressors, colonizers, to be working under leadership for reparation. They're not doing that. Only the African working class can do that. And it's going to take even a greater proportion as the parties struggle to be on the ground everywhere in Africa. So it's really profound leadership. Chairman has provided that. And the question of reparation is going to blow up, to a new death, basically. Yeah, I just want to say that. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Comrade Akile, I know we are struggling with the time issue, and I'm going to bogart this anyway. I think it's important. We're talking about a couple of things here. One of the things that's clear we're talking about is the reparations of man, the history of its development as a mass movement, how it came, like into being, and et cetera. And related to that, we're also talking about the party, the revolution, building the African People's Socialist Party. And I just want to say that that's a critical question that Comrade Luwezi responding to Jamal, saying this leadership question is fundamental. And if we understand that, then we see that the party has led. And I don't say this casually. I'm talking about not just the reparations demand, even the founding of the African People's Socialist Party for the objective of completing the revolution. The revolution is global. It was global. And it wasn't simply that it was crushed in one particular place. It was a global revolution. And if it had a weakness, it was that it was not connected organizationally in the last period as it was during the era of Marcus Garvey. And the African People's Socialist Party is led. We are the ones. Yeah, we are a party of practical revolutionaries. We say African internationalism is a theory of practice. You can't be an African internationalist just sitting on your couch. That there's actual activity, work that has to occur to carry out the mission. And so African internationalism has informed our practice, and it helps us to understand the urgency of this moment. This moment where we are having this discussion about reparations, which is a critical discussion. We're having a discussion about tribunal. But this moment, when the future of the world is being determined, or there is an attempt to shape and determine the future of the world, part of it being reflected in the war that white power, the United States, and the rest of the colonial powers are making against Russia right now. This is not some local thing that's there that has nothing to do with us. The fact of the matter is that Biden's attack on Russia is an attempt to defend, to protect the entire colonial capitalist social system itself that is under threat, especially as it exists under the hegemony of the United States government, threatened by the resistance of people in Venezuela, throughout the Middle East, threatened by the resistance of people on the continent of Africa, threatened by the growth of China and Russia as contending social forces that challenges what the United States can be able to do in terms of, and the rest of the colonial Europe. And so this is an urgent moment. And there are forces who are determined to decide what the future is going to look like. And these are the colonizers. They put up journals to speak to themselves on a regular basis. They end this discussion with each other about what it's going to take to rule the world. Who's going to rule the world, China or the United States? This is one of the big debates they have going. And now they saw Russia as a problem, and they moved to try to crush Russia, et cetera. And this is part of the reality that we're looking at. And the question before us is: can we consider ourselves as some kind of bystanders? Do we just watch history pass us by in this fashion while Biden? Can you imagine? Can you actually voluntarily accept the notion that Joe Biden, killer Joe Biden, is going to be able to determine the future of your child, our future, our Africa? No, that's totally unacceptable. So that's why we have to intervene in the deepest possible way. But none of the forces who are talking now about ruling the world, they don't even mention Africa. They don't even mention African people. It's just a given that Africa will always be dominated by foreign hostile power under the colonial mode of production. And what the party has been doing all this time, the party that was founded in 1972 with the stated objective to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s, the party that organized itself and organized especially immediately throughout the United States and bringing people back into political life where they had been crushed before. The party who raised up all these political prisoners who are still, many of whom are still rotting in prisons today. The party who struggled to defend the African Revolution, who led the struggle to defend the African Revolution from colonized colonial left colonizer theory, politics, etc., and waged this incredibly significant historic ideological struggle, defending the African Revolution, defeating that political line. That's the party did that. The party, when has pulled together coalitions of African people who were adrift, essentially because there was no political line, there was no theoretical or ideological coherence. Everybody was adrift, and the party pulled together different kinds of formations, organizations, and then gave the revolution a coherence, not just inside the United States. That's where Comrade Secretary General didn't mention it, the number of meetings that we had in Europe, and particularly in London, where we were bringing Africans together, struggling politically with how the world was to be understood, and how we have set new terms for political struggle in England and in France, and to some extent in Germany and other places. The party has done that. The party has led. The party leads around this reparation question. People say, well, how are we going to get reparations? We get reparations right now. The party does. The party with its 50 some odd institutions that has created a sector of the colonizer population that's interested in rejoining the rest of humanity, offered them a bridge through which they could do that by a practical denunciation, denunciation of colonialism and the white nationalist colonizer, to allow them to fight for Black power, etc. Party has done that, and ways of fierce struggle against superstition and all those other kinds of things that's clogged up the arteries of the African liberation movement for the longest period of time. So that's right, Jamal. As Comrade Secretary General Luwezi just said, leadership is a fundamental question. And in the cadre, we have attempted to place a capacity to lead, and that's your responsibility. And it's the responsibility of every African to move away from this small circle mentality that we see a lot of these forces embracing. They're opportunists. They will steal as much as they can in terms of philosophy, theory of the party, and popularize it, but they don't join the party. And they won't join the party because the party is the organization of African working class, and because the party has an objective to take power. And so you have opportunists, you have people who are revisionists, they'll take tidbits of the theory, et cetera, and it's our theory. We have been the theoretical driving force for the African Revolution now for the longest period of time. So join the African People's Socialist Party. You have to break free from that small circle mentality, just being satisfied with being a group of you over here, a group of you over there. Join the African People's Socialist Party. You have to move beyond simply appreciation of these single issues that sometimes we get caught up in, and be able to see that the future of Africa and African people rests in a single solution in terms of the African working class achieving power at the expense of the colonial mode of production. So I just wanted to say those things, Comrade Akile, and in saying that, finally, the significance of this reparation, the work we've done. In 1976, I attended a conference. I participated in a kind of coalition that was nominally under the leadership of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. And they did this mobilization in Philadelphia called a bicentennial without colonies. And we participated in this because there were these forces who were trying to pull together this some kind of organization, and this white representation was an entity called Mass Party Organizing Committee, MPOC. And So we attended meetings in the process of building for the mobilization in July 1976. And I'll never forget how in this meeting, that when the reparations demand was uttered, perhaps by somebody from the African People's Party, perhaps by some of the African People's Socialist Party, but certainly we were the ones who forwarded. I heard, our white leftist friends characterizing the reparations demand as coming from a lunatic fringe. That's how we were defined and understood at that time. That's the extent of the kind of work that we've done up to now, where presidential candidates have run, at least with the issue of reparations nominally as part of the platform. Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Derek.
Uhuru, Chairman, just want to really appreciate the overall discussion and, your intervention into this Q&A. We are definitely over time. I wanted to know, because we did have several other questions, but just in an effort to move things forward, we could take those questions in our next study. And if you wanted that, just that whole analysis that you just provided to kind of wrap up and be your kind of like your close.
No, I want one other thing. Comrade Kuumbania,
yes.
He says, thanks for the history lesson. I can see where the others in the reparations movement have not mentioned the leadership of the APSP who led. Why was Conrad Worrill seemingly seen as a reparations spearhead or any others? And that's an interesting question. If you remember when you first opened up this study, there was a presentation that I made. It was covered by 60 Minutes. I mentioned that earlier. Well, Worrill was one of the persons in the audience when I made that presentation. And along with Imari Obadeli. Or Worrill may have been on the platform, but at any point, the thing I was going to say is that Worrill made the statement that he wanted to salute the father of the reparations movement and asked Imari Obadeli to stand up. And it was really embarrassing because Imari Obadeli, when he stood up, he held his head, he looked at me and held his head down, because he was called the father of the reparations movement, because in 1979, after Reagan said it was cool to be for reparations, he decided to create this reparations organization. So Worrill understood that, and I guess I can't tell you why Worrill would be recognized as a spearhead, because he certainly wasn't. The other thing I would say is that most of the other organizations refused to participate in the best possible way to build the reparations movement. Like I said, a group of them were able to get together when Ronald Reagan gave the reparations to the Japanese, but before then they refused to participate in developing the reparations movement. And that's in absolute terms. I can even, so that'll do it, Comrade Akile. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, I just really want to, again, appreciate all of our panelists. It's really incredible discussion. This is not just, a lesson from history, but this is, like, as it's been stated, a historical continuum. And the work and the discussions that we're having today are just, laying out the significance and the whole relentless history of the African People's Socialist Party and the leadership of the chairman and the African working class. And on essentially every question that is centered around, this colonial mode of production that has essentially plagued the world for the last several hundred centuries. So this is, the work that we're doing, struggling to achieve power to overturn the social system and building a revolutionary organization. That's what we are about. And so I just want to really appreciate everybody for participating in this. Chairman, we did have some excellent other questions, so I hope we'll be able to take a look at those as well for our next study of coming up on next Sunday. So again, thank you all so much for this profound discussion. Thank you to our guests. Salute the leadership of the chairman. Make sure you follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Volunteer for the public relations team and book the chairman. Book the chairman to speak at your campus, at your event, for your organization. In fact, I saw somebody in the comment section say, duly noted, to the information to book the chairman. So you can bring this chairman, this fire that you saw in this presentation today, you can bring that to your campus, your organization, to your event. So again, to be able to do that, you can volunteer to volunteer with the chairman's public relations team. Email volunteer@omaliyeshitela.org. And again, build the African Revolution, join the African People's Socialist Party, apsp.uhuru.org. We will catch you both, or catch you all next Sunday for Omali Taught Me. Uhuru, Vanguard up.